The Exorcist, Jaws, Alien.
It was severe. It was intense.
I wanted to watch it.
I didn't sleep for 2 weeks.
Who are the minds behind the macabre of present day?
Biggest horror geeks and minds together, from A-listers to D-listers.
Were they as strange and twisted as their creations?
I didn't know any idiot can buy a video camera and make a movie. I'm like, I can be this idiot.
My parents didn't know what to make of it.
My dad was like, oh, so you're gonna be a hooker now.
You know, there are two types of people, Rocky Horror people and non-Rocky Horror people. Sometimes that can lead to drama.
The horror crowd helps each other out.
Makes me a little bit emotional to think about it.
The horror kids from around the globe found each other and slowly became...
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. I'm Joe Vanourney. The Horror Crowd is a new revealing, intimate documentary spotlighting the Hollywood horror community. Comes out on digital and video on demand September 2nd. And today we are joined by two of the people responsible for the Horror Crowd. We have the director of the film, Ruben Pla, and we are also joined by one of the people featured in the film. He has directed a zombie short horror film himself called Love Bite. And he's also one of the best DVD and Blu-ray producers in the business, Charles de Lauzirika. Ruben, Charles, welcome to Cherry the Geek TV.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure.
Ruben, I was wondering, we start with you, kind of give people a sense of your background. I know that you are an actor. You've been in many, many television shows and films. Kind of give people a brief background of yourself and how that led to developing the Horror Crowd.
The Horror Crowd? Acting since after college, when I got out, raised and started acting off-Broadway, off-Broadway. And then after a little while, doing plenty of equity shows, I moved to LA because I figured, let me do some money-paying gigs. And started getting into a bunch of TV, TV shows like Hunter, The Practice, Everybody Loves Raymond, just tons and tons. And then I started, a few years later, started getting in that filmmaking circle, acting in films like Insidious and Big Ass Spider and many, many others. And I met my dear friend Charles, and I do mean it when I say dear friend, by the way. And some people say that, they go, yeah, they just knew each other like 2 days. How long we know each other, Charles? About a decade now? I think it's about a decade.
Probably, yeah, probably.
Yeah. And then I started thinking one day, hey, I'm gonna, I talk to these filmmakers that I've met, just ask them some questions, see what makes them tick, their passions, their loves, and their first horror experiences and influences. And I talked to my buddy Hank Braxton, who ended up being my producing partner. I said, I'm thinking of doing this, the people we know, and just kind of like asking them questions, maybe put it on my phone, no big deal. He goes, I love the idea. And I'll bring in some cameras and I'll bring in lights and kit, because he worked in a production house. I said, great. And then we brought in his wife, Ariel Brockfeld, who became my producing partner. And then I started asking people like Charles and Lynn Shea, Greg Grunberg, Russell Mulcahy, Mike Mendez, Darren Bousman, Jeffrey Reddick, and Adam Robitel. Just goes on and on. It was 37 people in this documentary. And they all wanted to do it. They all lined up and wanted to reveal themselves to you and share their secrets with the audience. That's how it happened.
How long did that process take from when you had that idea to pitching it to them and getting them all to jump on board?
I had the idea. I started asking people like a week or two later, and they all started saying yes. And then as far as shooting it, I had it shot in less than 2 months. So I would say maybe 6 weeks. The shooting was easy. I just went to people's houses, or they came to my house and, kept going like that. I went, we did it at my house, their house, in a bar, in a park, in the studio. It was just all over the place. And the hardest part was just wrangling the schedule, the time, and then editing it. Later that took, a little bit longer because, I had 40 hours of footage to cut down to 90 minutes. So I loved every second of it because I love editing, but it was, time consuming. So that's how long it took.
Charles, do you remember when he came to you and pitched this idea to you, and what was your response when you first heard the idea?
Oh boy, do I remember.
What?
I remember seeing him posting pictures of interviews with like all my friends and all the horror crowd in LA. And by the way, by that point I had moved from LA to live to the Atlanta area. So I'm not going to blame him too hard, but
Too hard.
it's just like this cavalcade of who's who of LA horror crowd people. And I thought, man, I'm not really like super in the core of the horror crowd. I'm more horror adjacent, but I'm friends with everybody, and I've worked on some horror projects. I don't have a whole closet full of fried rag shirts, but it's fine. And then I was at a barbecue at our friend Sean Decker and Sarah Nicklin's place. And I think I kind of like just said, hey man, how come I can't be in your documentary? So it's actually me that kind of like invited myself
I
into
think
it.
it was me who asked you, but we'll let it go.
No. I remember I was really bitter about this. So I remember it vividly. And no, I mean playfully bitter. And I just kind of like joked about it with you. And just Hank was there, and I think he had the camera in the car or whatever. And literally
it was a 4K phone.
Just grabbed the camera, and we went and sat on a bench outside of Sarah and Sean's place and just started talking. So it was very casual, and it was I must have been like one of the last interviews you conducted, Ruben.
Yes,
so it's but it was fun because it was casual, and it was almost like capturing a real conversation like that we would have at any of these parties that we get to or gatherings. It wasn't like a formal sit down where it's like, okay, I'm here to be interviewed. I'm here to talk about stuff and be serious and give you, thoughts. It was more about like, let's just sit on a bench and talk horror movies. Let's just like do what we always do. So in a way, it was more fun and probably more honest in a way, just in terms of capturing the vibe of how we interact with each other, like right now.
Yeah, we needed like a mint julep to have on that bench, while we were talking.
Yeah.
Actually, the reason why it was so comfortable is because everybody that was interviewed were either good friends of mine or people I'd worked with. So I knew them all. They knew me. On the actual interview, we're like, high-fiving each other or hugging or cracking up. And, we're sitting there like at Lynn Shay's yard with her puppy on her lap, and she's stroking it while we're talking. So it was very casual, very cool, but a lot of interesting things came out.
I was going to ask you what maybe the biggest challenges were in making the film, and I think what you just said might be not the challenge, but probably the easiest part was that the shoot of it was all your friends. Sure. That was probably this is your first film as a documentary film, feature film.
First feature film.
You made a couple of shorts. Was the editing then taking all of this footage? You mentioned earlier that you had 40 hours of footage. Was that the biggest challenge, whittling that down to 90 minutes?
Yeah, over 40 hours actually. But yeah, that was the hardest, as I mentioned. That took a little longer, but not like an enormous amount of my time, a year, I don't know, something like that. It was out to festivals within 2 years of me, having the cut, and the whole thing was out and going to festivals. Again, just wrangling the schedule of all the actors, filmmakers, directors, writers, producers, journalists. So I just try to cover the whole gamut, not just make it only directors or only actors. I wanted to go across the board on that. Yeah.
What were your favorite moments, or maybe your favorite story that somebody Charles
because he was so.
Wait, Ruben, you dropped out there. What brilliance did I?
I said you were the most fun because you were so bitter.
Oh, right.
Interview.
Excellent.
No, you had moved away, Charlie, so we couldn't film you. You luckily came back, so then we got you in there and squeezed you in. Okay, it's not like I skipped over you. Man.
The part that Charles is featured in, I know you talk about Alien. Charles, of course, is responsible for the fantastic production of the Alien Quadriology Blu-ray set, and as well as Blade Runner and things like that. Mm-hmm. What is it about Alien that appeals to both of you? As
Charles?
Well, I saw Alien opening night at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, and I was 11 years old, I think. And it was funny because my parents had kind of bitterly divorced at that point, but they still collaborated in getting me to see Alien because my dad went to the first show at the Egyptian that day and then called my mom to say it's okay for him to see except for the scene when the guy starts choking. So the guy starts coughing at the dinner table. So of course, when that scene starts in the movie and I'm 11 years old and my mom puts her hand over my eyes, but she's so freaked out by the movie that she leaves that big of a gap. So I see the whole thing. And in that moment, it's not just that I was terrified and it was violent and it was like something I hadn't seen before in a movie, which is all true, but it was the power of cinema. It was the power of the audience reaction. It was just the overwhelming sense that you can create this kind of make-believe thing and have that visceral of an impact on people. It really got me thinking about movies in a different way. It was like the combination of Alien and then Jaws a few years earlier, where I just felt like this amazing connection with the film based on thrills and fright and terror and suspense and all these things, but also the kind of the beautiful artistry that went into both of those films. And Alien in particular being a science fiction film, being kind of like the first film or one of the first films after Star Wars that really captured that kind of used future look, and it felt gritty and you could touch it and smell it and feel it. It was just that kind of a movie that it was beyond what I had seen before, really. So aside from that, it's just a great, perfect movie. I mean, it's an absolute like perfect horror science fiction machine of a film that I have no problems with at all. Like I don't have no notes on Alien for me.
Yeah, it's funny because when I interviewed Charlie and then I interviewed my other buddy Cyrus, who also loves Alien and talked about it, the two of them, without knowing each other or being in the same room, start talking in parallel. You know, Charlie with the this, and then Cyrus with the this, watching the movie, and I started. These two guys who don't, it's different parts of the whole thing are saying the same thing pretty much. So that was interesting.
It's funny, Charles, that you say that the part that your dad said it's okay for you to watch it, except for the chest bursting scene. My parents, when they saw it, they said it's okay for you to watch, except for the end when Sigourney Weaver's walking around in her underwear. That's the part that you gotta
yeah.
That's the inappropriate one.
Yeah.
Well, my dad was a bit of a perv, so he didn't make a note on that.
He's like, all right, that's good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite segments of the film, Ruben, is when you're talking to Russell Mulcahy, director of Highlander and Resident Evil Extinction, Razorback. He tells some amazing Highlander stories.
Oh boy.
I mean, he doesn't do a lot of on-camera interviews. What was it like?
No, he doesn't.
Getting him.
We knew each other, and when I started doing something, I approached him and I said, "Would you like to do?" He goes, "Come on over." So he had me come over to his place in the West Hollywood, and beautiful place he has. And then started talking, and those stories about the Highlander started coming out when he first met Sean Connery. As you saw, he goes, "I'm meeting effing James Bond," and it was a nervous wreck, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" And he goes, and then Freddie Mercury, because Queen did the music. Freddie Mercury's went to his party, he got really drunk, and then he let me sleep upstairs in the guest room. And then when I got up in the morning, he's cooking me breakfast. And it says Freddie Mercury is cooking me breakfast. I mean, it's really funny stuff. But the most touching thing was when he said he was a little boy, like 11, he was watching The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And then when he sees that, this is what he says, when he saw the Cyclops coming across the beach behind the rock, and he looked up and he goes, "I want to be able to do that." I'm getting a little choked right now because I just was so affected by that. And that's kind of the whole thing of the horror crowd. Little boys, little girls are watching things and whatever, it's Alien, Exorcist, Shining, whatever it is. And then they get inspired by it. And they go, well, I want to write stuff. I want to direct. I want to DP, stuff like that, whatever the case may be. I love that.
This is a kind of a two-part question. They kind of overlap. It might be the same answer for both. But when you're talking to, what do you think it is about horror films that appeals to viewers in general? And when making the movie and talking to the participants that you include in the film, is there any common threads that you found that they all have a similar, I mean, everybody's different, but is there any common threads that you say, oh, everybody kind of says this is what influenced them, or is this is what led them down this path?
Charlie?
Oh, just in terms of why horror films attract people to them. I think it's kind of what I said before. It's kind of like the safe danger of it. You know, it's like a roller coaster. It's like you're going to go in, you're going to be taken right to the edge. You're going to be thrilled and horrified. You're going to see things that you would not see in real life, hopefully. But you're going to leave the theater safe and thrilled and exhausted because you were screaming or cheering or whatever. It's the emotional reaction with most films that I think why people go to movies, is to come out of it feeling something, and feeling that that communally with other people, like to have a whole audience. Like, earlier when we were talking off camera about Prey, for instance, like seeing Prey at the premiere at Comic-Con, it's a great movie, no doubt, like straight up, it's a great movie. But seeing that movie with an audience, particularly the third act of that movie with an audience, was transcendent. It was incredible. Just to the screaming and the cheers and the applause and the standing ovation at the end. I hadn't felt like that in a movie in many years, like in terms of just the audience being so in sync with the film. So I think horror is really great about that. It's really it's just a thrill machine
so much for
that just gets you
really
going, and you're along for the ride, and then you leave safely and you go home. And you sometimes you obsess over it, like many people in this documentary. People have made it their lives to deconstruct and to celebrate and covet and make their own horror. And I think of all the genres out there, horror is probably the easiest to sort of like tap into on a primal level, and to produce, because you can do a fairly decent horror film with low budget that we've seen a million times before. So it's a very user-friendly genre, even though it doesn't seem like it would be. It seems like it would terrify people and turn off people who maybe are a little skittish about that. But in actuality, I think it's a very user-friendly and filmmaker-friendly genre.
So I totally agree with Charles in that. Actually, in the documentary, Andrew Cash talks about how the horror crowd, you can have directors who make $20,000 films or studio films, and that there's no social barriers in the horror crowd. And that's so very true. That they're, very inspirational, how they work together, collaborate, I mean, that's how I got involved with Insidious with James Wan, because I was on a promo trailer he was shooting, and just went, yeah. He goes, hey, I'm looking for people to help me out. In that case, to be an actor. And I said, sure, I'll help you out, no problem. So I went there, met James Wan. He liked what I was doing, and he says, you want to be in Insidious? I said, okay. So that those things happen. I mean, they really do happen.
A lot of movies from the 80s kind of have stayed in the cultural zeitgeist, right? Those are the ones that kind of people look back on, the late 70s and all the 80s. And then the newer films from the 90s on, I mean, there are exceptions here and there, but people keep going back to those films from the 80s, and those are the ones that they seem to rewatch a lot, the most. What do you think? Why do you think that is? And can modern horror duplicate that?
I have a thought, because I speak to, they're like either in their 40s or now turning 50s. And back then, when they were younger, they got influenced by this thing. They affect, as Charlie said, you get affected by like in Prey. Imagine the smaller kids watching that, how affected and inspired they're going to be. The same thing happened back then, whether it's a slasher film or a sci-fi horror or whatever it happens to be. It puts an imprint on you when you're younger. Then if you start watching horror movies at 35 or something, yeah, you'll enjoy it, but I don't know if it's going to go, oh my God, I want to do this,
Well, also, I think it's certainly it's that, and it's a sense of nostalgia going back to childhood, where it was almost like contraband. It was almost like something you weren't supposed to see. It wasn't, or have, or whatever, where you'd watch these things on TV in the middle of the night when your parents thought you were sleeping, and it just kind of like this wholesome danger to it that I think we remember and we want to kind of re-celebrate. And a lot of those filmmakers from the 80s, like John Carpenter or Tobe Hooper, and George Romero, like a lot of these filmmakers created some of their prime work during that time. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy for us to kind of go back and again and just enjoy those films with new audiences, or we want to introduce someone to one of their films. That's fun. That's fun to do. But as filmmakers, I think people want to recapture that sense of discovery of, again, it was kind of naughty. It was kind of like something we weren't supposed to see, but in a fun way, And I think all those films are brilliant because they also broke so much ground. Those filmmakers are always inventing and reinventing the genre. And these are filmmakers, by the way, who didn't make horror before they started making films. They were I don't know if I said that correctly. They were like basically their first big classic horror films were their first horror film, right? It's like Night of the Living Dead, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Before that, they hadn't made horror films. So to come out of the gate with like just like genre busting films that completely redefine everything, it was inspirational, you know, and that's something you could watch them, you know, hundreds of times on TV, because again, with the home video boom of the 80s, that allowed us to bring it home and to watch it over and over again. I saw Dawn of the Dead when I was 13 for the first time, and I must have just worn out that VHS tape because I just kept watching it over and over again because it was gory and it was scary, but it was fun. It was such a fun movie. I mean, it still is a fun movie. And that was a big inspiration for me. It was just, I guess, the home video aspect of it.
I was going to follow up with that aspect of it. Do you think that because the 80s, there were more, number one, there were more studios, and there were more mini studios like American
Zoetrope?
AAP, the
American International, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
The, you know, smaller company like a New Line, et cetera. And then add that there were drive-ins in the, you know, early 80s, and then there were the video stores, and there was less selection. There was less, I guess, places to find your entertainment. So people discovered these films at the video store. People discovered these films on cable television. There were fewer cable television channels, where today you have fewer studios making movies, and you have these streamers, and while there's an abundance of quality productions that are getting made and more choices, it also kind of makes things fall through the cracks. It's kind of harder for modern films to find an audience because there's just so much content out there. Either you'd like to address
Yeah, but that not just horror, for anything. There's so much content, so many choices, so many channels. When I was growing up, you know, you had the 3 networks and a couple of, you know, cable local things in New York or whatever. Now it's like hundreds. So how could there not be more content and more choices and more, you know, things are diluted. I just want to harp back real quick about what Charles said about when you know, as a kid and all that. In the documentary, Lombardo Boyar, who's an actor, he says something very, very interesting, how affected he was when he was 6 years old. He saw The Exorcist. His mom took him to see The Exorcist because she said, come on, let's go see it. And he's like watching this, and he said exactly, it felt like I was watching something that I shouldn't be watching, you know, and that is an allure. No question, that's an allure. So anyway, go ahead.
But going back to also like the sense of, you know, like we are overindulged now. We have every way to watch a movie, and so many movies to watch that it's not special anymore in a way. It's content. I hate that. That's the way it's been framed. That you can go on Netflix and you see a million thumbnails on your screens, like, oh, what am I going to watch today? Versus when we were kids, we had to seek things out. We had to hunt it down. We had to like want to see it. And that provided a really great, again, kind of a thrill to finally get it, because, you know, it wasn't impossible to find a certain movie on tape or whatever, but it was a challenge sometimes to like have to find it. Was it still in stock at the store? Did somebody rent it out? You had to wait another day or whatever. That whole like pursuit made it even more kind of delicious when you got it. And now it's just like click. All right, I'm watching it. It's over. Let me post about it really quick on Letterboxd. It's just like such a robotic process now. Whereas before it was like it was like bounty hunting. You had to like go out and find the movie you wanted. So that's something I kind of miss from childhood for sure. And I think that makes the experience more special when you have to pursue it. And that's true of everything, not just movies, in life. You know, the thing that's just handed to you on a silver platter is not as special as the thing you had to fight for.
Or work for. Yeah.
I want to go off topic for 1 second, Ruben, if you'll just indulge me. Since I have Charlie here, I want to ask him a question. He, like I said before, you're one of the best DVD Blu-ray producers in the business. Jumping off what we were just talking about, today's times, I remember fondly the golden age of the laser discs, bonus features, and the early days of DVD when the studios were throwing so much money into producing special content. And today, not only are the studios specifically kind of not focusing at all on physical media, but their budgets for the bonus contents have dramatically shrunk, and you have to have these boutique labels like Arrow and Shout Factory and Criterion. Those are kind of where physical media adopters have to go to seek their content. What are your thoughts on that, as somebody who this is your business, right? This is what you do, and you do it very well.
Well, thank you first of all for saying that. It is kind of like we're back in the Laserdisc niche era when you'd have like these, beautiful Criterion laser sets that would come out that would cost like $200, or the Universal box sets, the Signature Collection or whatever they were called, and you had to spend serious coin to get these, kind of now relatively low res, low fi, very kind of basic sets. But back then it was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. So, it's weird that ironically it's the smaller labels that are the ones that are most enthusiastically celebrating films, not just, because they don't usually get to license big films. So they're licensing obscure films and strange films and art films and, things like that. And I love that. I love that suddenly this whole like world of movies is suddenly getting treated to like this really great supplemental, background information, and it's just sort of like you really get to enjoy the process from a much more interesting perspective, because it's not from a big budget studio with like A-list people who approve everything, and that you get to tell a very specific story, which fortunately I was lucky enough to kind of avoid for most of it when I was doing it, because I had filmmakers that were interested in telling interesting stories and interesting kind of anecdotes, and really get into almost like the film school in a box vibe. That nowadays it's kind of more, kind of older films that are, remembrances, and kind of like you're in a way you're kind of like just saving these stories while these people are still with us. There's a lot of that going on. It's better than nothing. I wish it was, 2007 again, when you could actually do really big, robust box sets that were always, fun to dig into, and you'd spend a weekend or a week going through it all, which is what I always tried to do with the ones that I worked on, was to just give you a library about this one movie that you could then explore at your leisure, but that era seems to kind of have morphed into more of a, let's just save the stories while we can in whatever form, whether like very recently, like in the last couple of years, you're seeing supplements on discs that are Zoom interviews, because that's how people have to communicate now. And then so that obviously saves money, which is good for the distributor, but it's not as special. I mean, the stories are special, but the experience isn't special. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just definitely like it's a very strange time. It's not a bad time. It's just a strange time. And it's just an adjustment to how these things are made that we have to all live with, both as creators and consumers.
So Ruben, your film, The Horror Crowd.
All said, Charlie. Yes.
The Horror Crowd traveled the festival circuit. You played at a lot of festivals.
Over 40.
What was the general reaction from the film, and who was the audience? Did you notice that the audience was both horror fanatics and hardcore horror fans, but did you get some crossover with mainstream?
So glad you asked that.
Mainstream viewers, and what was the response?
So glad you asked that. Yeah. As I mentioned, it was over 40 festivals, and it was across the board, because the film got into many. I mean, it's almost like, I think it was, I don't want to say half, I mean 1/3 to 2/3, 1/3 non-horror festivals, just straight festivals. And then the film was up against features that were not horror, and won several times, like won best feature and best documentary against non-horror films. So that was very rewarding. And the festival directors and many of the actual audience members would contact me and say, "Oh, this movie really affected me. It spoke to me." I love that they say that it spoke to me. And the non-horror people say, and not just because of the horror that was fun, but I want to start my own horror crowd, my own crowd, but for music or for sculpting or for baking or whatever. Meeting once a month, like we used to do, Charles and I and many of the others, Jump Cut Cafe for trivia, but they want to go and they want to meet and do their, knitting or whatever it is, crocheting or anything, music. That was just very rewarding, Yeah.
When people watch the film, what was your hope going into that they take away from it?
Kind of what I just said about, that you guys can, support each other, network with each other, no matter what it is. That happened once I started assembling. It's like I went in there thinking, I think the audience members and the festival goers are going to be inspired by this and want to make their own clubs. That's not how it happened. It happened when I started assembling. I go, oh my God, this is like, this really works for everybody, not just horror. Because, we cover everything. I mean, horror, sci-fi, fantasy. You know, obviously Charles is an expert in sci-fi, but we also, you know, we cover comic books, a big segment with Ryan Turek and Breer Grant about comic, and Cyrus Voris about comic books and how that influence, about Halloween, which Halloween is universal. You don't have to be a horror fan to be into Halloween, and costumes, and what kid didn't dress up at 10 years old to go trick-or-treating, even if they weren't into horror. They would dress up as a princess or whatever, you know. So yeah, it covers the whole gamut, not just horror. Yeah, of course it's horror focused, but there's many other things in there.
When you were developing the structure of the film, did you have an idea in your head going into it, like this is what I want the structure to be, or did that structure develop as you were talking to the people and getting their answers, and then you started going, okay, a lot of people are talking about this, or comic books, or
Yeah.
childhood memories, and then that
Sure.
kind of led to the structure of the film.
Yeah, choice number two. As I mentioned before, when I saw that Charlie and Cyrus were both talking about Alien and so many things in common, the thing, I go, oh, okay. And that happened with the comic books. Oh, yeah, sorry. I went into thinking, I want to ask about comic books and screenwriting. We got Jace Anderson and Sean Keller talking about screenwriting, and that segment is great because they're both like really, really specific writers, and they talk about the specificity of writing. And so I didn't film people thinking, oh, this is what it's going to be about. It came out in the editing, in the structuring of it. No, there's no question about that. That's why I specifically have the segments. Being the weird kid is a big one. Obviously, all the horror filmmakers were saying about, I was kind of the outsider to myself through horror. Several people say that it empowered them. It gave them reason for being, and as a kid, and gave them a purpose. And they mean it when they say that, not just saying that. So yeah, it came together.
Can I ask a question really quick to Ruben?
Yeah.
Did you have a list of questions like that was almost like a template that you followed, or was it more free form? Both? I mean, how did you, when you sat down for the actual proper sit down interviews, did you have a list of questions that you went off of?
I definitely did have a list of questions for you, Charlie. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Love you, brother. No. I had some questions. Go to especially in the studio interviews. We did 23 people just alone in the studio. And those I had first horror film that influenced you. What was your first work? Things like that. Maybe 4 or 5 questions, but then it just went, oh,
Sure.
by the way, I like comic books.
Right.
I like this, the Cyclops walked across the screen. I go, oh, first
Right.
info. Yeah. Anyway,
But presumably you used those same questions over multiple interviews.
No,
right?
I changed for some of them because I knew that some were more into, for the writers, it would be different questions than for the actors,
Right.
and the directors and the journalists. We have several journalists and the producers. So different. Like we're talking to Shaked, he's all about finance, and it comes out in Shaked Berenson. It comes out in the film that he says, I came at it from. That's another thing when people talk about, I came at horror from a different point. I came at it through finance and putting it together, and that's interesting to me. You got people coming in because I'm a writer, Sean and Jace, and then I'm a director, Mike and Darren, and I came at it from this, and then I came at it from finance. I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is because when I interview people, it's generally about the same subject, even though everybody, like you say, comes at it from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I notice the structure starts to enter into the flow, right? Like the story starts telling itself at some point, because you're hitting the topics in relatively the same order. You might go off in different tangents because of the person you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's almost like I always tell people, these documentaries have a story they want to tell. Yeah. It's like you as the documentarian can go in and try to force it, but organically in the edit, you're going to start to see these stories kind of naturally start to come out, and you have to let it kind of find its way.
I agree 100%, Charlie. Again, let me point out though that your approach and the job you did is very different, because you were dealing with, it's about this film, it's about Alien, it's about, T2, it's about Spider-Man, whatever the case may be. And you had, I assume, certain things that you needed to cover. I went at this as a love letter to the people I knew, the filmmakers I knew, you of course included. I wanted to really just know what makes you tick, man and woman. What influenced you? What got you that spark? There's there's a segment about sparking the imagination. What did it? Oh, for me, it was my little Dracula dolls, and Mike Mendes said, yeah, my little, and then for Darren Bousman, it was my little horror books that I've had since fourth grade, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Werewolf. I mean, that stuff is fascinating to me. For Russell Mulcahy, it was the Cyclops. I keep going back to that. I just love that image. And he shows us, and this is my first camera when he was like 10 years old, and he pulls it out from behind the sofa. When he did that, he didn't tell me he was going to do that. He just had it there. And he goes, and it's a wind up and the settings for, I'm off camera, but I'm like this the whole time. So he's cracking up because he sees me like this, but that was fun.
That's awesome. That's great.
Well, we are almost out of time. Before we go, though, I want to ask you both, what would you say are your three top horror films of all time? I know you have to narrow it down. And we'll also, because people always tend to go to those classics, also, what are your three maybe more recent examples of good horror content that's out there right now?
Well, no, I know Charlie likes Prey of the recent. Go ahead, Charlie. You want to take that?
Yeah, I'm not really good with lists because believe it or not, I don't carry these things around in my head all day.
I know.
Going back to kind of the all-timers, though, definitely I think The Shining and Dawn of the Dead are my top two.
Shining.
And then top three kind of like rotates around quite a bit. I will say I really love Exorcist 3. Like that has really grown on me more and more over the years, not just because it has one of the scariest jump scares of all time, and not just because it's really intelligent and smart. It's also funny. It's also really witty, and I just enjoy William Peter Blatty's writing so much in that film that it's always a joy to watch, even though there's some truly terrifying and disturbing stuff in there. And it's kind of a flawed film as well because Blatty had a tough time making it, and there's at least two different edits of it. And I'm always attracted to those films that are kind of like orphaned a bit, and it had a rough delivery. So those are my top three older ones. But like the newer ones, Prey is amazing. I really loved like Hereditary. I thought it was great. I feel like I'm going to miss like a million and probably several that are made by our friends. But I'm not opposed to this term elevated horror. Some people just freak when they hear the term elevated horror, and it might be kind of a pretentious, kind of like, I don't know, douchey way of saying it. But I understand the subgenre they're talking about. It's almost like art horror, and I really have come to like those films more recently. But at the same time, there's like Malignant, which was a blast, which is so much fun. And
did you like that one guy played the
yeah, he was all right. I guess he was fine. No. When my wife Carly and I, when we watched Malignant and Ruben showed up, it was just like, hey, there's our friend Ruben. He's stealing the movie. He's stealing the movie from everybody else. But I do think there's like a 10% amount of horror films today that are just magnificent, whether they are art or elevated or more popcorn and more fun. And then everything else is like people following the lead of those, which I always say about horror is like, if there's a big hit, like The Conjuring comes out and it's a huge hit, don't make other Conjurings. I don't mean sequels. I mean like other filmmakers, don't make your own Conjuring, because with horror, the fertile ground is always somewhere else. It's like the gold rush. Once you tap into that vein of gold, don't race there. Go find your own thing, because then you'll find your own Blair Witch. You'll find your own like kind of revolutionary film versus copying what's the fashionable pick of the day. And I'll stop talking so Ruben can talk, because I know we're out of time.
No. I love listening to you. I totally mirror you. I am not a fan of lists, because someone's, what's your favorite movie or favorite three? I go, dude, I got 20. And it changes constantly, whether it's horror or like, not horror, or songs or TV shows, whatever. But I'll give you just a couple quickly. Shining's up there, obviously, of the classics. Alien, still one of my all-time favorite horrors. And a lot of people think, oh, that's really science fiction. That's not how. No, it's a sci-fi horror film, because they're in outer space in a haunted house, and they're tugging around a haunted house, and there's a ghost in it, only it's a xenomorph jumping out of the shadows. So to me, it's always been a horror movie. One of the older ones that I like a lot is Burnt Offerings with Karen Black and Oliver Reed. That was really, they're both of them, they're unbelievable performances. Robert Reed, that's the other guy. Oliver Reed was in the pool with his son, and he starts getting possessed. I'm not giving anything away. The whole movie's about possession, and he's like, "Oh my God, is he going to kill his own son?" That's a chilling scene. Cause what young boy doesn't like fear being killed by their dad? So that's really good. I love the Taking of Deborah Logan that our good buddy Adam Robitel directed. That was his springboard. They got him Insidious 4, the last. So I really like that movie. The scene, in the cave. I won't say anything, but everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Like that one scene, I mean, deservedly should get Adam like 10 movies. It's like that one bit was so powerful. Like that.
So powerful. When I first saw it,
give that guy tons of work.
And he did get tons of work.
And he did. Totally.
Insidious 4, and then it was like it took off. But we talk about it in specific detail in the Horror Crowd documentary with Adam about that scene. Dude, how did you do that? And so that was a lot of fun. And Hereditary. I don't know if I mentioned that already, but I like Hereditary because he's like really bold and taking chances, and he's not, as you just said, making his own Conjuring or making his own Insidious or whatever. He says, no, I'm going over here, so I love that too. And the performances in there are fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think Ari Aster is probably one of the people to watch in the modern era. Or Mike Flanagan also is doing some wonderful work on like Midnight Mass on Netflix.
It was crazy. That was crazy. Talk about doing original things and not copying anything. I mean, that wasn't Salem's Lot. That was something else. And
he had something to say. And Get Out, Jordan Peele's Get Out. He had something to say.
Absolutely, for sure.
How did you forget Get Out, Charlie?
Because I'm old, Ruben. I'm feeble. I'm feeble-minded.
Feeble.
But no, going back to Alien being a genre hybrid or science fiction horror, it's like Jaws is a genre hybrid. And Jaws is my favorite movie of all time, full stop, period. Like that's my favorite movie. So it's got horror in it, but it's also adventure. It's also kind of like, it's a road movie in a way. It's on the ocean, but it's like three buddies in a boat. So I love genre hybrids. Those are my favorite because it's like Reese's peanut butter cups. It's two flavors. It just kind of like should go together, and they do.
Yeah, I love that when you mix them like whether it's film noir, horror comedy. Like Mike Mendes is one of the masters of horror comedy. Spider and many other things he does. He infuses it with. Hi, Mike. He infuses it with comedy, and you're like watching. It's scary. Don't Kill It with Dolph Lundgren. I laughed so much during that movie, and it's a horror movie. And it's one of the best performances by Dolph Lundgren ever. So anyway,
I saw that in the theater, and the first 20 minutes brought the house down. It was just just got you into it in such a fun way. Very enjoyable.
Well, Ruben, where can people see the Horror Crowd? I know it's coming out September 2nd. Where can they find it?
Very good. It does open September 2nd. Both. And right now it's on pre-order on Apple TV and iTunes, and you get a discount price. So I would do it now. September 2nd, it goes to the regular price. So if you're listening to this now and you want to check it out and see all our filmmaker friends and Charlie, the beautiful Charlie in it, go pre-order it.
Will there be a physical release coming as well?
At this point, they haven't discussed that with me yet. If everybody pre-orders it and it explodes, then they probably will. But I'll keep everybody. I post every day on Facebook and Instagram and keep people updated on. It's on this, it's on that. It got this award and did this. Review this. So if you want to follow, just go to Facebook under my name, Ruben Pla, or the Horror Crowd has its own page. So either one, and Instagram too.
And I'm going to make a 3.5-hour documentary about the making of the Horror Crowd.
Nice
to have friends.
Yeah.
Well, the film is called The Horror Crowd, coming out on digital and video on demand September 2nd. Ruben, Charles, thank you so much for chatting with us today on Cherry the Geek TV.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
Bye, Charlie.